We're in Trafalgar Square in London. This is my hometown. I was born about half a mile from here.
Where from?
Switzerland.
From where?
Switzerland?
Switzerland.
Yes.
Do you have children and grandchildren? Children?
Children, yes.
How many children?
Two.
I was elected to Parliament when I was 25. I served for 51 years in the House of Commons. I was a minister for 11 years, working at Downing Street.
The President of the War Coalition, Tony Benn.
People come here to demand the votes for men, the votes for women, campaigns for peace, campaigns against the Iraq War, in support of the miners, against the Israeli invasion of the Lebanon and also of Gaza, were held here. And you see, the future is in what people demand. And when those demands are made, then in Parliament the laws are made. And that's how democracy should work. My name is Tony Benn. When I was born, travel was something very, very limited. Very rich people could travel, I suppose. Soldiers always travelled. But the first time I left the United Kingdom was, I think, in 1938. My father took me to France for a day. Then when the war came, of course, I got quite extensive travel, because in 1944, at the very beginning of 44, I went to Africa. I went down through the Middle East, through the Straits of Gibraltar, through the Suez Canal down to South Africa, then up by train to Zimbabwe. Then later I flew up to Cairo, and then I went to Palestine, and then I came home in a troop ship. Well, my interest in the Middle East goes back, first of all, my father was very keen to get us out of Egypt, and he went to Cairo at the time in 1945. He always believed in Egyptian independence, and at the time of the Suez War I was very much involved. I spoke in Trafalgar Square and helped to run the campaign against the Suez War. And then that gave me an interest. Of course, I'd been in Palestine in 1945 and known a little bit of the background. Well, my father in 1945, he was made a minister in the Labour cabinet, and he went out to negotiate a new deal between Britain and Egypt over the Suez Canal and so on, and it failed. And his passion for Egyptian independence was very strong. And at the time of Suez, he went to see President Nasser, and they had a talk. And so my interest in Egypt began then. Well, it didn't begin then, but it began when I visited Egypt. I remember on a train in 1945, an Egyptian lawyer came up to me and said, "Get out of Egypt." And I said, "I agree with you," and he was a bit surprised. And my feeling for Egypt was very strong. I must admit now I'm very disappointed by the view that Egypt takes about the Palestinian question. I find it incredible that they support the American and Fatah line, but still. The liberation of the Middle East from Western colonialism has always been an interest. I was born in a very political household. Both my grandfathers were members of Parliament. My father was elected to Parliament in 1906. He began as a Liberal, and like me, he moved to the left as he got older, and he joined the Labour Party. He supported the independence of India. He was Secretary of State for India in 1929, and he brought Mr. Gandhi to London, and I met Mr. Gandhi when I was 6. And I don't remember what he said, of course, or what I said wouldn't matter. But what I do remember about Gandhi was, unlike many men who pat you on the head and talk to your dad, he said, "Come and sit on the floor." And he was sitting on the floor, and I sat next to him with my brother and listened to him. And when I look back at that, I realize the great moral leaders of my lifetime, not one have been white. Gandhi, Mandela, Desmond Tutu. And I would add Paul Robeson, the black American singer. And so that's inspired me, the fact that so much of the moral guidance has come from people who had nothing to do with England or America or anything else. What I remember from my background is two things. My mother, who was a very religious woman, she brought me up as a Christian, and she was passionate about justice, and anything that was unfair was wrong. And all my life, that sense of justice, which comes from all religions, you see Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, they all said the same thing: treat other people as you want to be treated yourself. And my father said things to me that I remember. He said, always say what you mean, and mean what you say, and do what you said you'd do if you have an opportunity, and don't attack people personally. My mother was a very religious woman who used to read the Bible every night, and she said something to me I've never forgotten. She said, the Bible is the story of the conflict between the kings who had power and the prophets who preached righteousness. And she taught me to support the prophets against the kings. And the older I get, the more true I believe that to be. And I find wherever I go, that same prophetic teaching is to be found in all religions. So I don't feel in any way divided from Jews or Muslims or Buddhists. I find if you explore the roots of your faith, you have a common interest and belief, and that is the basis for the future of the human race. Well, the prophets told you really how to behave, and they were not interested in power for themselves. And you see, when Bush said God told him to go into Iraq, that was nonsense. God does not have an office in the Pentagon. And when the Zionists say that Moses went up Mount Sinai and God allocated Palestine to the Jews, God is not in real estate. And so the corruption of religion has always upset me. But the feeling you must do what you believe. Oh yeah, and any more on the Kathleen in May? Has it come back safely? Well, that's a very, very... And then Trafalgar Square, and then 5 o'clock tonight I'm doing the Al Jazeera. I'm doing the staying put. When people talk about politics, they always talk about powerful people and weak people, successful people and unsuccessful people, rich people and poor people. The real question is it right or is it wrong? Now, you can argue about what's right and wrong, but that's the question you should ask. Are we doing the right thing? That means, how does it affect other people? And what moral relationship do we have to other people? And that's where you're driven back, you see, to the prophets. they're going to go up to Lichfield and film it.
I don't want her to make the same mistake that her father made of accepting life, accepting situations. I want her to fight, and I want her to win. Because I've seen her playing,
Well, insofar as the people of the Middle East have been members of Western colonies or empires, they're right, they have been ignored. Their interests have been made secondary to the imperial powers. That's what empires are about. And their arguments are not understood. Their religion is vilified because using Islam as if as a source of violence, which is totally untrue, has made it worse. I mean, I see Bush as a Christian extremist. That's what he was, who tried to use Christianity to justify a war for oil, and then blaming Islam for encouraging people to defend their own countries. And getting that across, not just in the Middle East, but getting that across in Britain and America is quite difficult. So maybe we have to campaign more actively in our country, in the United States, in order to build the bridges of friendship. But I'm sure it will happen. If it doesn't, the human race will end, and I don't think the human race is as stupid as that.
Before September the 11th, many in the world believed that Saddam Hussein could be contained. We will also deal with madmen who harbor weapons of mass destruction.
I had a dream last night about a girl I can't forget. Well, I had a dream last night about a girl I can't forget. I got nothing left to lose but regret.
In 1990, when the Kuwait crisis arose, I went to see Saddam. I had 3 hours with him in Baghdad, driven round Baghdad till I was dizzy because they didn't want me to know where he was, went to an ordinary row of houses, and inside there was Saddam and 9 members of his government, and he was sitting on the sofa with a revolver in his belt. And I said to him at the beginning, "Can I speak honestly to you?" And he said, "Yes." "Can I tell you exactly what I feel?" He said, "Yes." I've been advised to do that by King Hussein of Jordan, who I went to see on the way to see Saddam, and the king said, "Whatever you do, say exactly what you think, because the people round him will be too frightened to say it." So I was very candid with him. At one stage he took his revolver out, and I thought I had gone too far, and he put it down, and we had 3 hours, and it was a very useful discussion, and for me all the hostages came out. The immediate object was the release of the hostages, but my real purpose was much wider than that. And I found it very interesting because Saddam was very straightforward. He said he felt utterly betrayed by the United States. He said, "They armed me against Iran, they supported me." And April Gillespie, who was the American ambassador in Baghdad, said to us, "If you go into Kuwait, we shall see it as an Arab question."
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
And then next time I saw him, I didn't know whether I'd be able to. I went to Baghdad without any promise. And when I got there, they said, we don't know. And just as I was leaving to come home, I was told he would see me. So I went to the palace. This time the palace, of course, he was there, and we had this interview which his officials recorded. I didn't want to bring a BBC crew because I thought they might be engaged in an assassination attempt at the time. And during the interview with Saddam, he went away in the middle and prayed for a moment, and he was perfectly courteous to me. I mean, I have no doubt the man was a brute in terms of his dictatorship, but I think at that particular point he hadn't made a speech or done a broadcast for 12 years. And I thought at least people ought to know what he's saying. And of course what he said to me was true. He said he didn't have weapons. He said he had no links with Al-Qaeda. And that was necessary because the Americans were suggesting that Saddam was the man behind 9/11, which he wasn't. So that came out, and it annoyed the British government very much because they thought that interview might give people a different view of what was going on than the view that Blair wanted us to believe. And Blair, of course, made a false statement to the House of Commons. So it was quite difficult. I told the Prime Minister I was going. When I came back, I phoned his office from Oman coming back, and I said I'd been, would you like to see me? He didn't want to see me because his mind was already set on war, and anything that deflected war would have been very unwelcome to him. Mr. President, may I ask you some questions? The first question is, does Iraq possess weapons of mass destruction?
إن هذه الأسلحة ليست حباية أسبرو بإمكان واحد أن يضمها في جيبه.
Well, I think there's no question about it. President George W. Bush decided before he became president that he would get rid of Saddam. Saddam had nothing to do with 9/11. It was about oil.
وقد قلنا مرارا ونقول اليوم بأن العراق خالي من مثل هذه الأسلحة.
Do you have links with Al-Qaeda?
لو لدينا علاقات مع تنظيم القاعدة وكنا مقتنعين في مثل هذه العلاقة لما خجلنا منها.
When I see British or American governments criticizing governments in the Middle East, I say to myself, is this an excuse to intervene, to occupy? And I'm very suspicious of that.
Labour Party! Labour Party! Tony Blair, terrorist!
It's an illegal war, an immoral war, it's an unwinnable war. If you want to get covered on television by the BBC, have a fight. And they see it all as an opportunity to imply that all opposition to the war is violent. And so you have quite a struggle, really. And when we had the big demonstration, they tried to ignore it. They couldn't ignore it because of the fact it was so big. But they said it was anti-American or left-wing extremism or something. They'd do anything to prevent people understanding what it was about. But that's not abnormal, because the control of information is the most powerful weapon in the hands of any government. If you can control what people think, then you're safe. And you have to try to change that perception by running public campaigns, which is what we've done very successfully. Peace, salam, shalom. Today, in 50 cities around the world, people are gathering, as we are gathering, to call for peace in the Middle East. Well, I don't believe in the word protest at all, because the word protest means I've lost and I don't like it. Well, if you lose, of course you don't like it. It should be demands. Instead of protesting, we should make demands. Get out of Iraq, get out of Afghanistan, freedom for countries. And so the word protest is a word designed to defuse it. What's the point of protesting? You've lost. But if you make demands and go on making demands, they can't be ignored. If you want to bring about success, you have to mobilize people. You have to build movements. See, I don't think prime ministers, dictators, presidents, emperors last very long in the memory. What you remember are the teachers and the movements, the teachers that explained the world and the movements that changed the world. They said, did Saddam Hussein have weapons of mass destruction? Well, if he did, they were sold to him by the Americans. Because the Americans armed Saddam to get rid of the Khomeini in Iran. And so I do think an understanding of that is so important. And if you look at what the Israelis did in Gaza over the year, over the Christmas period, it's horrific. And there again, you see, when I was young, concerned, as I still am, with the plight of Jewish refugees and the Holocaust, and then the Israelis come along and invade and kill 1,400 people and so on. And we have got to get that right.
Paris on an ordinary Air France flight. Had 2 nights in.
Well, you might find you haven't done half your life. What do you do, Cal? What job, what capacity?
Interesting to hear somebody who is a conviction politician, it was said during a meeting, who is not afraid to give their view honestly, even though it may not be to their advantage.
Is a symbol of hope, really, that somewhere, sometime, all the stupidity that's going on in the world, in terms of war, in terms of religious people who believe that their particular point of view is the correct one, and I'm not being anti-religious in any way in this, because I believe that everyone has got their own point of view and they're entitled to their own point of view. I just wish they would all get their act together.
Hello, I can hardly see you. I was regarded as the most dangerous man in Britain, and I got death threats quite regularly. And, it was horrible, personally horrible. But you had to accept that they created a monster whom they pretended was you, and you had to protect yourself from being put off by it. It's Tenor Ben. This is the article you asked me to do about the election. The economic crisis that we face is a very serious one. As the years have gone on, I realized that Zionism is the enemy of the Palestinians, and so I've become very much involved in the Palestinian movement against the Nakba, against the Gaza war, the Lebanon war. And so all these things, I'm president of the Stop the War Coalition, the Iraq War, the Afghan War. I've been involved in many, many peace movements in my life. And I think if you do that, you build friendship with people from all over the world. I mean, the Muslims in Britain, who are attacked by the government all the time, have found in the left and the peace movement friends. And we have built friendship with the Muslims in Britain, which is probably the most important long-term effect of the peace movement. Muslims feel they have among friends here. And I have Muslim members of my family, because I'm a funny family. My mother was a Scot, my wife was an American of French extraction, Huguenot. One son has married a girl whose father lives in Israel, mother's from Calcutta, so I have 2 little Indian grandchildren. Another one's married an Iranian, married an Irish, another one married an Irish girl. And my grandchildren, one's in love with a black American doctor, another's in love with a black girl from Mauritius, another one's in love with an Iranian. So I'm breeding a UN peacekeeping force in my own family. And where I live in London is so wonderful. The people from all over the world, just in this area. My hair is cut by an Iraqi. I go to the supermarket and there's a man from Kenya and a girl from Eritrea. And I go to another shop and someone from Ghana. And so I think, particularly for my grandchildren, this is normality. My little granddaughters at a school in London were at a school in London with 77 nationalities. And when I went to talk at the school, it was like addressing the General Assembly of the United Nations. And if I talked to my granddaughters about multiculturalism, they wouldn't know what I was talking about, because they have American friends, Jamaican friends, Jewish friends, Muslim friends. That is normal. And I think building a world around the acceptance and welcoming of diversity is the only hope for the human race.
We've worked very hard, as the Honourable Member will be aware, to express the concerns.
I've made many mistakes in my life. I'm not ashamed of making mistakes because that's how you learn. What I would be ashamed of if I'd ever said anything I didn't believe in order to get on in life. I hope I've never done that, but I've made every mistake in the book. And I think that is how we learn. The main thing is encouragement. I realize as I get older that if you encourage people, then they walk 10 feet tall. If you discourage them, they feel I'm a failure, what can I do, and so on. And the function of the old is to encourage the young, because I've been encouraged in my life by teachers and old people I knew, and I think that is the most useful thing you can do. It's very modest, but people said once to me, what would you like on your gravestone? And I said I would be very happy if it said Tony Benn, he encouraged us. If I've encouraged people, as far as I'm concerned, my life has been a complete success. And the way they control us is to frighten us all the time. They frighten you, they divide you, men and women, black and white, Christian, Muslim, Jew. Then they demoralize you, well, you don't understand, and they make you cynical, everybody's a crook. And if you want to win, you mustn't be frightened, you mustn't be divided, you mustn't be demoralized, and you mustn't be cynical. And once people discover that, then it's astonishing what can be achieved.